The surprisingly strong nation of Wallachia has quite the potential to become an immensely powerful nation once it unites with the other Romanians and breaks free from the Ottoman yoke. Wallachia has an absolutely insane level of industrial capacity considering its high population, relatively high arable land, and its local access to wood, coal, iron, and eventually oil. One might consider it the Shaanxi of the West, albeit it's not quite as strong as that legendary Chinese state. In this guide, I'll be taking you through how to first off form Romania, and eventually the Danube State, but more than that, we'll be hitting top great power and top GDP as well as ripping apart the other great powers while establishing our own power block. Like I say in most of these guides, I'm not playing completely optimally, and there are many things I could do better, but I consider this run to be a pretty strong little Romania guide. Either way, this is Wallachia, let's get into it. We started the game as Wallachia simply because they're the more powerful Romanian nation over Moldavia, but the strategy will be about the same if you choose to play Moldavia. Initially, we're part of the Devleti Alia as a protectorate of the Ottoman Sultanate, which is actually a pretty sweet deal for us Romanians. We get access to the entire Ottoman market and pay no dues to our overlord, although if our autonomy is ever reduced, we'll suddenly not be so happy to be stuck under the empire. As an initial move, I'm just going to spend my authority on decrees. I'm going to put down a resource decree, and then pretty much every other decree I can, just because we have no better use for the authority anyway. For technology, I'm getting the stock exchange for better mappy, and building-wise, I'll be getting some construction going, after which I'll get some tools for the iron mines I'll build later. I want to get to iron construction as soon as possible, so getting that supply chain going is my first priority, as it often is for small nations. Remember that a wooden construction sector generates 2 construction points, while iron makes 5. That's a 2.5 times increase, which goes really hard on a small nation. To ensure that the Ottomans don't get my liberty desire too low, I'm going to ask them for stuff I know they'll say no to, such as my own market and regime support. I want them to say no because it harms our relations and spikes my liberty desire. This could be a risky play, since in patch 1.7.5, nations can do a diplomatic play to reduce autonomy like they could in much older patches, and we do risk the Ottomans doing this to us, but we can ensure it won't happen by sucking up to the Russians. While we're still quite weak, we do need to depend on the protection offered by the Russians, even though they hold our homelands in Dobruja and Bessarabia. This does not mean that we won't make some aggressive moves of our own though, as to the west, the Serbs are also an Ottoman subject. Naturally, since the Ottomans rule us both, they can't possibly pick between us, given the Sultan loves all his subjects equally, so we can take Serbia pretty much for free. We're about equal in power, so I'm going to hope for a general with a tactful trait, which I got on my first roll, very lucky. Tactful gives a flat 5 bonus points to defense, so we can appear to be weaker than Serbia, baiting them into an attack, then use the general's extra 5 defense points to beat them back for a counter-offense later. I learned this strategy from Tobias's Texas strategy, by the way. You should check that video out, as he used it there to great effect to defeat Mexico. To defeat the Serbs, we'll definitely need conscripts, but luckily Wallachia is full of peasants just waiting for adventure to find them, so grab yourself 25 infantry conscripts and get in position. That strategy I mentioned about using a tactful general wasn't even necessary because the Serbian AI just refused to make any conscripts. I do still recommend you hope for a tactful general just in case the AI in your game is more competent, but yeah. Wallachia with 25 conscripts is more than powerful enough to conquer Serbia. Our next target is going to be Austria, and I know that probably just shot some alarms in your head, as the Austrians are way too powerful for us to take, but we're going to have some help from Big Brother Russia. Also, I lied, we're going to conquer Moldavia beforehand. You can wait for the Unite the Principalities journal entry to unite with Moldavia for free if you want, but honestly, it's such a low infamy cost to take land as Wallachia that it's no big deal. This is because your starting king has the cautious trait, which reduces all infamy by 25%, and you're an insignificant power, fighting most of the other insignificant powers, cutting infamy down even more. Moldavia only costs me 11 infamy, and I'll have to wait until the Russians are willing to ally me in order to fight Austria anyway, so it's nothing. Moldavia is a bit stronger than Serbia, so you're probably going to want that tactful general for this fight. You do win the war in the long term, even if you lose a couple battles, simply because Wallachia has way more pops in it than Moldavia, so you can take the losses, whereas once you beat Moldavia in a defensive battle or two, they'll be unable to reinforce and you'll win easily. To further my chances of beating Austria, I had started passing national militia, and that's because with that law, we'll be able to raise 100 conscripts in Wallachia that we can use to flood the Pannonian Plains. Normally, I'm a professional army type of guy, but in this case, the construction points it would cost to build up the barracks is too much of a pain. Anyway, Moldavia fell on Christmas of 1838, and now I've tripled my state count while keeping a positive budget and getting my first bit of tools and iron going. You'll see I'm making groceries, and this is to generate extra buy orders for grain in the hopes of shooting the price up so I can activate corn laws. But to be honest, this was a fool's errand considering I have to make the Ottoman market's grain price go up, which will be very difficult given my small share of the market. It'd be a better use of construction to make more iron with these points, or maybe some paper, or better yet, some universities. Universities are expensive, but the tech advantage you can get is absolutely worth it. Like any building, universities gain bonuses from throughput the larger they get, so the first couple universities won't feel that worthwhile, given that 2 innovation points isn't much, but the more you build, the more points each one gives, and once you get to 50 universities in one state, you'll make more innovations than you could ever ask for. Of course, that comes much later. I finally got my alliance with Russia in December of 1839, and the way I did it was by inflating my military score. You see, the AI considers how many conscripts you've got even if they're not raised, so I just maxed out my conscripts across all my states even though I couldn't possibly afford the wages and goods to ever raise that many soldiers. Despite that, Russia views me as a solid ally thanks to that. We can use that to fight Austria, but I was a bit apprehensive because this was actually my first attempt at playing Wallachia, and I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants, so I was worried I'd be throwing the run by attacking Austria and just relying on Russia. I did grow a pair and go for it in August 1841 with the goal to conquer Moldavia, get some reparations, and liberate Hungary, of course. It might sound strange for a Romanian nation to free a Hungarian nation given the two nations' history, but ultimately, the goal here is to break Austria down and eat up the pieces that come out. Attacking a great power incurs much more infamy than attacking a minor or insignificant power, so we can force Hungary out and then attack them in 5 years for much less infamy overall. The war broke out in December of 1841, and the Russo-Romanian army had a slight advantage on the Austrians. Austria is about evenly matched with Russia, but my army, small as it is, does tip things slightly in Russia's favor, and the Russians have the manpower advantage over Austria, whose available labor for the army isn't quite as high. After a couple devastating battles, the Austrian army was leaking manpower, and the invasion of Pannonia was quite smooth. During the war, the Russians offered an investment agreement, and I did take it, but in your run, I'd actually recommend against it because we're a bit small. I'm so used to playing larger nations that I forgot how crippling it can be to have some foreign power eating up all your profitable industries. Later in the game, you're going to see me struggling to build up a strong investment pool, and this issue can mostly be traced back to this moment, as the Russians will buy up a lot of my most profitable industries. It certainly didn't kill the run, as you'll see, but it was a mistake. As a general rule, if you're a small country looking to industrialize, don't take in foreign investments, since your local capitalists will be outcompeted by foreign ones, which will make industrializing and liberalizing much harder. The army finally reached Vienna in 1843, and after a few weeks of occupation, the Austrians surrendered, releasing Hungary, paying out huge reparations for the small Wallachian principality, and giving up the rest of Moldavia. I started passing tenant farmers around this time, but it had almost no chance of passing. I was going for an early Hail Mary since I didn't have corn laws, but ultimately it didn't work out and I cancelled the law. Right after Austria just got pummeled and lost their most important constituent state, the Prussians swooped in for the Brothers' War, which I think we all know they will win in this situation. From here, I mostly focused on what buildings to make. I want to keep my budget healthy, so I'm making lots of iron and paper, alongside a little bit of subsidized groceries, again in the hopes of getting corn laws, but like I said before, this was a red herring. One way I could certainly trigger corn laws would be to entirely upend my market by leaving the Ottoman market, and although it's not the best move since the Ottoman market is nice, I got an opportunity I had to use, so I went for it. The Ottomans had a huge civil war, and I had Russian support for my independence, so my victory was a given. I declared an independence war with Russian backing and decided to liberate Bulgaria. The war was off to a strong start, and I even got corn laws to trigger, but this is where I bait you. You see, I'm not quite ready to be off in my own market, so this was actually a ruse to just trigger corn laws. Once the Ottoman Civil War ended, the Ottomans came back in force, and for some reason the Russians just decided to not contribute many men to the war. I'm not sure what made the Russians so apathetic, but it did mean that my Ottoman war ground to a halt. It looks like I might even have a chance of losing. Instead, I accepted my failure to free Bulgaria and I took a white peace, happy they got corn laws out of it. I passed homesteading, using the modern conservative in 1846, and then went for laissez-faire right after. In terms of whether interventionism or laissez-faire is better as Little Wallachia, I'd say that there's an argument for interventionism perhaps, but I do intend to expand my nation quite a bit very soon, so perhaps the new capitalists in the financial sectors I'll be occupying can run the economy for me. As a quick pointer, interventionism tends to work better on smaller economies where you want to be more deliberate with what exactly gets built, such as when you have a small construction industry and need to use it for lumber, iron, and coal. A laissez-faire country with only 10 to 20 construction points might find itself making a bunch of textiles when it needs steel. If you've got a lot of construction points or expect to get more soon, and you've got a large investment pool going, laissez-faire is the better choice, if only for the extra company slot, let alone the more efficient capitalist investment. Anyway, while that was passing, the truce with Hungary ran out, so I declared war for Banat in May of 1848, and then added Transylvania and Békés to the war, making one of them a primary goal so that Hungary wouldn't back down. In this case, I do not want Hungary to back down since I want all that land for myself, given their Romanian homelands. The AI is much less likely to back down if there are more primary war goals in the war, so although it costs extra infamy to make a state conquest a primary goal, it's worthwhile. The Hungarian army is tiny compared to mine, so I just put my general on offense and waited until I won. It was with the occupation of West Slovakia that I'd conquered every Romanian homeland outside of Russian control, which is enough to form Romania. Bessarabia and Dobruja will be tough nuts to crack considering how powerful Russia is, but I can covertly build up while under Russian and Ottoman protection until I'm ready to betray the Slavs. With Romania formed in just over 13 years, we've got ourselves a pretty nice little country with laissez-faire capitalism and homesteading. We still got legacy slavery, but we have so few states that it's not a big deal. Our humble Romania is unfortunately still landlocked, so our opportunities to engage in the imperialist era of Europe are quite limited. Romania is surrounded by great powers on every side, so there's no choice but to militarize and expand the core territory in order to gain more strength. In terms of economy, Romania has access to everything you could ever want, so there's not much special going on here. Lots of iron, tools, coal, and pretty much everything I'll need to industrialize heavily. Later on in the run, I'll start making a consumer economy, but for now, most of the country is composed of peasants that can't buy anything good anyway. I'm having a bit of a problem with all these radicals, and in theory the solution to a radical problem is to start up the consumer goods industry, but I think it'll be more effective to focus on my construction industry and later do an abdication and resignation to quickly eradicate the radicals. I'm implementing free trade both to end the Corn Laws journal entry and because I do want to get some trade routes going, but again, Romania doesn't have much need for trade due to its ample resources. I did go after Austria to balkanize them some more with the help of Russia, and for their war operations. A strategy that works better than you might think as a small power is to use your big brother ally to get you free money from your enemies. Austria, even in their weakened state here, makes a lot of money, and if I can siphon some of that off into my budget, it'll help me get more buildings going. I'm going to liberate Galicia, Lodomeria, and Croatia, while also getting those reparations, with the same plan as with Hungary. I'm going to conquer the breakaway states from Austria later on once I've got the infamy for it. We definitely can't go over 100 infamy at this point since it would probably make Russia abandon us, and it would make everyone cut me down to size. After getting free trade, I tried to eliminate migration controls in the hopes of maybe stealing some Turkish pops, but to be honest, it would be overkill to do so. Romania and Transylvania have plenty of pops to use for our businesses. The war with Austria was over quickly, as Russian peasants washed over Vienna again, and I immediately got to work destroying my relations with the freshly liberated breakaway states. I failed to pass no migration controls, so I went for some voting rights instead, with wealth voting. I don't quite want census suffrage or universal suffrage since it'll give way too much power to my peasants, but with wealth voting we can get our capitalists to start controlling our politics. Despite the reasonable chance of success the law had, I did also fail, and I took out my anger on Hungary, who I took Trans-Danubia and Central Hungary from. These two states have huge numbers of peasants and also give me direct access to Vienna, which will be my gateway to Europe later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before going further, I decided at this point I no longer needed the Ottoman market since now I've got everything I could ever want, be it labor, resources, or arable land. Wallachia even has silk, although I am missing dyes. The Ottoman market doesn't really have any dyes anyway though, so I'm not missing out on much. This time, I will get my actual independence. I'm going to conquer Dobruja and liberate Bulgaria, but because I'm taking land that Bulgaria would get if it were liberated, I can't, so instead, I'll conquer Bulgaria. With Russian support, the Ottomans were like paper, and I got all my war goals pretty quickly. Immediately, I was offered a place in the Russian Empire, which I considered for a moment. The main reason I'd want to be in the Russian Empire would be to get access to their market, but their power bloc doesn't have market unification and isn't a trade league, so I'd kind of just be putting myself in peril by doing this, as becoming a Russian protectorate would be almost inescapable. Russia is a whole other beast compared to the Ottomans, as demonstrated by them carrying me for this run, so I'd prefer not to potentially get subjugated, even if their market is pretty strong. Refusing the offer does come with a hit to relations, but it's something we can't fix. For my next war, I went to make Croatia a protectorate simply because I don't have enough infamy cap to conquer them directly, and a subject or two won't hurt. Croatia does have a coastline, which is valuable, and in a way, it may be better to outright conquer them if only because of that coastline, but I paid too much infamy taking Hungary to really be able to take Croatia too. It is what it is. At least I was able to pass landed voting in 1860, which would be my first step towards full liberalization. Naturally, the Conservative Party would be dominant in the first election, but the rural folk and liberals made a surprisingly good showing. Thanks to the rising influence of the petite bourgeoisie, I was able to get proportional taxation going, which, with how many peasants I've got, would probably reduce my income, but in the long run, would increase it eventually. Since I had control over Dobruja and Bulgaria, I do now have a coastline, so I can get some ports up. I don't have much I want to import, but I do have a lack of dyes, so I got some ports, brought in some dyes, and tried to make more clothes with better production methods, considering how expensive clothes are in my current market. Seems like I may have been entirely relying on the Ottomans for clothes in the past. I got proportional taxation shortly after, but my budget is still negative, although I'm now in the top 10 powers, which is pretty nice. I decided to just full send my taxes, given most of my pops are still peasants, and that way I can afford to get more construction going. Although I harp against taxes sometimes, it's better to just go heavy on the taxes. Right now I have no consumer economy, so adding taxes won't really depress my economy in any meaningful way, nor will it affect my standard of living particularly heavily. What it will do is generate a ton of radicals and harm my legitimacy, which kinda sucks, but it's not a huge deal. Shortly after the tax hike, the cautious king Alexandru Ghica was deposed by the intelligentsia, implementing a republic under Iosif Lucide, who was also cautious by pure chance, and who was a royalist. I guess he himself wants to be king, although I don't think I'll be going back to a monarchy right away, if at all. Republics are nice because they let you have more flexibility with your head of state, although I don't plan to do a ton with my ruler. As long as he's cautious, then we'll have that infant production, which is just so huge. After getting out of the law menu and looking around, I saw something I've never actually seen before, and that was Burgundy. The Netherlands formed Burgundy, and I had no idea they could even do that. They're a Russian protectorate, by the way, and they're being watched over by a massive North German Federation, but yeah, I have no mods on or anything. I guess Burgundy's just part of the game. I found on the wiki that the United Netherlands, which the Netherlands formed, will be called Burgundy if they're a monarchy with autocracy or single-party state, so there's that. I've got over 1,000 hours in this game, but I've never seen this before. In February of 1867, Austria attacked our protectorate, Croatia, who I of course defended, and honestly, this is some immense hubris on Austria's part. They know I've got Russia as an ally, so I don't know what they had in mind here. I invited Russia in, added war operations, then added a conquest of Austria, the state, to the war goals, looking to cut the Austrians in half. If I take Austria, then everything in the south will be cut off, presuming their capital goes to Bohemia or Moravia, which it usually does. I was once again asked to join the Russian Empire bloc, which I said no to, again, but it's kind of worrying to take these huge hits to my relations every couple of years. I had added a Liberate Bohemia war goal to this war, hoping to completely decimate Austria, but the war goal didn't go through because Austria's capital got moved to Moravia after they lost Austria. This means they can't release Bohemia due to their capital being there, but that's alright. I'll be coming for the Czechs later. To me, owning Vienna as Little Romania is definitely already an impressive feat. We're entering the mid-game by this point. I'm not quite a great power yet, but I'm well on the way. The Ottomans, by the way, somehow, despite all the pressure Russia and I have been putting on them, have actually completed Tanzimat and are still a recognized power. I'm certainly not done putting the Ottomans down, but that is very impressive. I started passing state atheism at this point, by the way, and in terms of why, well, I had a roleplay scenario in mind here. You see, Romania now controls a lot of Orthodox, Muslim, and Catholic land. The only way to unite the people who believe in different interpretations of God is to just throw God out entirely, which I know no Romanian would ever do, but this is a Romania dominated by the clout of positivists, and so it's pretty easy to pass state atheism. I also want the authority from the state atheism, so it works out nicely. While passing the law, I've got a revolution demanding a professional army, which isn't too bad, and I'd be willing to pass that law to avoid civil war, but national militia does allow me a lot more of an army since I can raise hundreds of conscripts, and we have tons of peasants to throw at wars. After state atheism, I got to work on public schools, and this is for the literacy rate, but also for the assimilation. I have dreams of a Romanianized North Transylvania, and perhaps even a large minority of Romanians in Hungary and Serbia. Using a combination of greener grass campaigns and assimilation decrees, we can demographically shift particular states over a long period of time, but the states along the Danube have a ton of people in them, so we might not be able to pull it off. In July of 1872, I finally got on to getting my universities going. I'm trying to research up to shrapnel artillery so I can go toe-to-toe with the other great powers, but it'll take forever unless I get my universities up. Since I'm getting public schools soon anyway, I may as well start the universities now. Once my schools increase the national literacy rate, I'll be generating huge innovation numbers. I ended up canceling public schools though because the chance to pass was just too low, and I instead went for racial segregation. You see, pretty much every pop in my empire is a European, so with racial segregation we'll eradicate all discrimination. More important, this will allow us to assimilate Europeans to being Romanians, which will be crucial in culture-shifting places like North Transylvania. Despite my work to tolerate everyone in the empire, the South Germans of Austria did secede and forced me to put them down with violence. The Bavarians decided to support the rebellion, presumably since they're cultural brethren, which I responded to by bringing Russia in to ensure things went smoothly. Part of me was afraid that maybe bringing Russia in would make other great powers come in and we'd be starting World War I over Vienna, but it didn't happen, so that was a relief. The professional army movement, although powerful and radical, did finally give up after race segregation was passed, simply because the number of radicals shrunk immensely afterwards. The next war I got involved in was against the North Germans, who invaded Russia looking for control over the Baltic governorates. Since I got called in as an ally, I was able to add a war goal, and it sounds lame, but I just added a goal for war operations. Sure, I could liberate Rhineland or Hanover or something, which would be based, yes, but honestly, taking all that money from the North Germans would be immensely valuable. I raised my army, raised my conscripts, and unleashed my power on the Germans with help from the Russians, and we marched on Berlin pretty quickly. I obtained great power status kind of falsely through this war. When you raise conscripts, those conscript soldiers contribute to your prestige, and given that 90% of my army is composed of conscripts, war massively inflates my prestige. Once this war ends, I will almost certainly descend back to major power, but it does show how close we are to being a great power here in Romania. The Germans capitulated, handing Danzig and Silesia to the Russians, and handing me a ton of cold hard cash. Notice my budget, by the way. Once the conscripts were gone, I went from losing an immense amount of money to making a ton, and now I can expand my construction even more. First though, I'll be conquering Hungary to help secure my position as a great power. The nice thing about rank loss is that it takes a long time, so I can enjoy the grandeur of great power status for a while here. I demoted back to major power in September of 1878, but then I also passed public schools. I regained my great power status organically in January of 1881, and with that, we've got what I'd call Greater Romania. We don't yet have Bessarabia and the rest of Dobruja, but the loss of those homelands we've made up for with the conquest of new ones. That of course does not mean we will not be pursuing the full proper Romanian borders. The Danube River runs from South Germany all the way to the Black Sea through Romania, and its importance as a natural border and mover of goods is an identity to much of the people living along its banks. There is a formidable nation called the Danubian State, which is interesting in that it requires you to have multiculturalism to take it, and that its flag is the exact same as Austria-Hungary's flag. I do intend to form this country much later, but before we do that, we've got to do two things. First, we invade the Ottomans, as is tradition for just about any Danubian country. I'm liberating Syria, Iraq, and Bulgaria. The purpose of this war is to create some small countries that I can use to help me in the goal of the second of the two things I'll be doing. It's time to make my own power block. I've been refusing the Russian power block offers over and over, so it's about time that I actually forge my own destiny here. I'm going to make a trade league, if only because it's basically the only option I've got outside of the ideological union. In terms of power block meta, I'd say Sovereign Empire is best, and Trade League is a close second, while everything else is tied for distant last in general, but can beat out the competition for a third place spot in particular circumstances, such as the military treaty in a max infamy run. I'm naming my power block the Confederația Dunării, which is Romanian for Danubian Confederation, according to a quick Google Translate. I'm taking external trade, which combined with free trade as a law will make my trade routes cost pretty much zero bureaucracy, allowing me to spam them as much as I want. Afterwards, I immediately got a Danish mass migration in Wallachia, which is the first of many new immigrants I'd be welcoming. I spent a lot of time staying at peace from here, looking to burn off my infamy and get Bulgaria, Syria, and Iraq into my trade block. You see, although we are the Danubian Confederation, the trade of the river goes beyond that land. It'll take time and money to pull all those countries into the power block, but while that's going on, I'm building up my heavy industries. I've got steel and glass going in preparation for when I swap to steel construction. I do still desperately need dyes, and although I can keep trading for them, I've actually got a reasonable coastline by this point via Dobruja and Bulgaria. Perhaps I can look overseas, and in particular, I've got my eyes on Japan, who is as of yet untouched by European powers. I'll have to start reducing relations for now though, since Japan likely got the event where they give a random great power an obligation and get high relations. I was never notified of it, but the random obligation is quite suspect. I also decided at this point that I didn't want Britain to control the EIC anymore, and although it's too late to balkanize India, I can at least make them lose control over what will become Bengal. I showed this off in my Denmark guide as a way to cripple Britain early, but we're doing it here as Romania as well to try and weaken the juggernaut that is Great Britain. If you're on the same side as Britain in a war, and then you attack a subject of a British subject, that subject goes free. Now, in the case of the EIC, they no longer control the princely states, who got transferred to Britain when the EIC briefly became the British Raj as a puppet. Since then, they've gone back to protectorate status, but they just so happen to have one subject in the form of Bhutan. I'm going to join Britain in their war against Siam, and then attack Bhutan, which will cause Britain to fail to protect their subject. If an overlord does not defend their subject, that subject goes free, and so the EIC is free. This isn't nearly as crippling as it could be if you do this in the early game, which I did as Denmark in that aforementioned guide, but it is still painful for Britain to lose about half of India like that. Afterwards, I invited the communist Fritz Nielsen to take over the intelligentsia, but I was not planning to go communist. What I had in mind was to do some state capitalism with command economy and technocracy, but I'll spoil this for you now. I had so much trouble passing laws because of all my radicals that I couldn't pull it off, unfortunately. I've been wanting to do a full command economy run for a while, but you unlock command economy so late that it's hard to do without rushing for it. My plan was to pass command economy while the industrialists had a protectionist in charge, because their preference for command economy and laissez-faire is equal with an interventionist. I then realized I do not have the technology for command economy, which would invalidate the whole tactic. As a brief rundown on command economy, which I will elaborate more strongly on in the future, command economy trades economic potential for economic control and authority. As long as your government dividend efficiency is below 100%, which it always will be, you are effectively destroying money, which otherwise would exist somewhere in your economy. When a capitalist takes money, they invest some of it in the form of the investment pool, they pay some of it through taxes, and the rest goes towards either buying goods or increasing their standard of living so they can in turn buy more goods. Nothing in this process is destroyed. With command economy, I'd gain an additional 50% government dividend efficiency bonus on top of the 25% base. That can be supplemented with a handful of technologies to go as high as 85%, I believe. That means that 15% of all wealth generated will be destroyed, akin to tax waste, which also destroys wealth. For that reason, command economy is objectively bad, but if we're being real, that 15% waste isn't that consequential in most cases, and the authority can be pretty nice. It's also important to know that laissez-faire gives access to an extra company and increases capitalist investment efficiency, which effectively creates money from nothing in a way. So you're losing a little more than just 15% of the wealth of the nation compared to laissez-faire, but that's getting into the weeds. Either way, my point is that I failed to get command economy due to the tech requirements for it. Inviting this communist to the country would end up setting the nation down a difficult path, as my legitimacy tanked pretty hard due to the ideological incoherence of the industrialist and communist parties. But it's not too bad. In December of 1888, Russia attacked Britain to try and take Bahrain of all things, and they sealed their own fate by adding the war goal to liberate Cornwall. There's absolutely no world where the Russians can land in Britain, but naturally, I joined the war anyway, getting a bankroll off of Russia, which is great for me. I was planning to just capitulate once the war started, and then Britain added the ban slavery war goal to me. Wow, even better. I bet later down the line, Britain also added a humiliation though, which isn't so good. Humiliation and banning slavery in war will cause me to lose 50% of my total prestige for a while, which will almost certainly knock me back down to major power, but it's kinda worth it for the bankroll, honestly. I capitulated, losing a ton of prestige in return for a powerful bankroll and a free ban on slavery, and in the wake of that capitulation, the communists got to work gaining power in my nation. I chose the option to strengthen the intelligentsia in the World to Win event. Afterwards, I was able to get Japan as a protectorate for free during a civil war they had, which I accomplished by absolving the random obligation I had on them. Hell yeah, dude. Free Japan is awesome. Once they're my subject, I can build up all their dies, and all I'll need are a ton of convoys to ship those dies back home, which will be tougher than it looks, considering how little of a coastline I have. We can see this issue at play by the fact that I have negative 3,000 convoys thanks to Japan being part of my market. I'm going to have to spam down a ton of ports to fix that. Really though, I went to annex Croatia, and doing that for whatever reason just generated 4,000 convoys. I'm not perfectly certain about how port connections and stuff work, so I have no explanation for this, but it was very nice to have that problem solved. The Ottomans supported Croatia in my war to annex them, which for me is just another free opportunity to break them down. I'll be conquering Bosnia and southern Serbia, as well as liberating Albania, who I will later pull into my power block. By this point, I've gotten Iraq and Syria into my block, and I'm working on Austria, Bulgaria, Albania, as well as, soon, the Italian countries. Italy hasn't unified yet, and probably won't unify, so I can just pull each of them in individually. The best way to get leverage on someone is to just make as many pacts as possible, including bankrolls, trade agreements, defensive pacts, and so on. For larger countries with more leverage resistance, you have to get investment rights and control a larger portion of their GDP if possible. Spamming trade routes at someone can help too, but if those trade routes aren't profitable, it can feel pretty painful to support them. This was where I sat around trying to research central planning to get to command economy. Meanwhile, my people clamored for the return of voting rights. I was still relatively set in my plan to go command economy at this point, and I had enough innovation points to research the tech pretty fast. I did actually get the tech, and I did begin implementing the law, and I even made pretty significant progress on it passing, but the landowners and industrialists wouldn't have it. They went for a civil war, and it would have fired before I could pass the law. I'd have almost certainly lost the civil war, since my ally Russia probably wouldn't join due to our different government interest groups, so although I got very close, I gave up on the command economy dream here, acknowledging that my industrialists were just way too strong for it. It was time to re-implement voting, and put Romania out of its technocratic age. Voting will be useful for getting a stronger trade union going, which, whether I'm going communist or not, is useful for the healthcare, the workers' rights, and other strong laws. In 1900, I had a Croatian uprising, which of course was put down. Although I still have tons of peasants, the industrialization never really ends. It's about time that I start taking down other great powers and asserting myself as the sole great power. This won't be easy, but it must be done to prove that Romania is the ultimate world power. I have a couple preparations to make before going to war with guys like Russia, who will be my first great power target. I'm not going to completely destroy every great power just because I don't really need to, but Russia is a very powerful country that owns Romanian homelands, and who I don't trust to not one day betray me. Before doing a bunch of war, I'm going to grab Austria, Bulgaria, and Albania for my power block, which will help a lot with getting more mandates. I'm going to work on Parma, Sardinia, Piedmont, and the two Sicilies as well, but they'll take a bit of time to drag in. If you're curious how I'm dragging people in, it's basically by just building up their industries for them, and thus owning a quarter of their GDP, giving me a huge leverage advantage on them. I even took one level of the foreign investment mandate to make this more powerful, so I can pull in a lot of these medium-sized European nations, whose markets aren't too bad honestly. I'll also be taking their pops as migrants, which would be useful except that I already have plenty of labor. More peasants are still better than fewer peasants though, so I'm benefiting anyway. As of May 1903, I've almost Romanianized northern Transylvania, with the Hungarians having about a 100k lead on the Romanians there, but that will be changed as other immigrants that arrive there assimilate to Romanian culture. I took advantage of a diplomatic play between Sardinia, Piedmont, and Parma a year later. I wanted to conquer Galicia, Lodomeria for a while, but they're in the Russian Empire's bloc, which has defensive cooperation. Thankfully, the Russians joined a war in Italy, so I destroyed on their side to put us on the same side, and then I invaded when Russia couldn't do a thing about it. To help get my assimilation going across the empire, I put in multiculturalism, which will allow all pops to assimilate no matter their heritage, and it will also trigger a bunch of mass migrations from countries that otherwise would have nowhere to go. I got Switzerland in the block in 1907, researching a ton of military tech, and just continuing my GDP build-up. I stepped in to help Austria in a civil war, since I was worried they'd lose and leave my block, and then France invaded Switzerland, who is also in my power block. I don't want to lose Switzerland, if I don't have to, so I guess it's time to defeat France. I can't add any war goals to this war, but the Swiss have chosen to conquer Alsace-Lorraine and liberate Brittany, which is pretty good. During the build-up to war though, the North German Federation made their move to unite Germany, which I realized was kind of problematic for me. Part of the German unification war would involve unifying with Austria too, who was in my power block, and since I'm in a play against France, I can't join a play on their side, and therefore, I can't step in to stop Germany from forming and therefore stealing Austria from me. At least I can block Germany from getting Alsace-Lorraine by giving it to Switzerland before they occupy it. With my massive conscript army, I've got to rank number 2 great power, but once the war is over, I'll drop back down of course. The problem with conscript armies is that they're super expensive when you raise them, but to be fair, I've got literal millions of peasants, so why not give them jobs, right? You'll see that I have so many conscripts that my standard of living and GDP will directly be impacted by the army being mobilized. Before the Switzerland war started, I had 14 average standard of living. After the war started, and a few months into it, I'm over 15. This is because I have higher military wages, so my conscripts are making good money and living the life. Once the war ends though, these veterans will be kicked to the curb and my standard of living will probably go back down. With that in mind, I don't want war to stop, so when France was defeated in 1910, I swung my gargantuan army's momentum east to face Russia. Because the army is already mobilized, I don't even need to wait for the conscripts to ready up again. I've already got over 1 in 50 of my population in the army, which means 2% of my people are stuck in those conscript stacks. The United States today has less than 1% of its population in the army, so you can get an idea of how immensely militarized I am, and, by looking at my budget, how immensely expensive this army is. This is a time of great chaos, to be completely honest, as the positions of great powers are all shifting. The Germans have taken all the German homelands in Austria, which has isolated Austria to Italy and Slovenia, while the Russians are about to lose control of Bessarabia, Dobruja, and Ukraine in their war with me. I'll inevitably come to blows with the Germans over Bohemia and Moravia, but for now, they're also at war with Russia, so we're working together. Although tensions are high between Romanians and Germans, the two armies marched together against Russia, only because the Slavs were a common enemy. Once the Russians capitulated to Romania, the Romanian dream finally came true. Every homeland is owned by Romania, and Ukraine will act as a huge buffer state to keep the Russians at bay for good. Unfortunately, by being at peace, my conscripts have returned home, back to regular life, and as such, my standard of living has plummeted back below 15, although it is higher than it was before the France War. I wanted to face off against Germany soon, but I was a bit apprehensive. I think I just associate Germany with being this unstoppable juggernaut of a military power, but in all honesty, with how huge my army is after conscripting, I could absolutely crush the Germans in a land war, which I'm going to discover a little bit later when I engage in the largest battles I've ever had in Victoria 3. I could go over more stuff in these interwar periods, but to be honest, there's not much to cover. I'm building up my industries, as I would normally, and I've got over 2,000 construction points as of 1919, but I mean, there's nothing new going on here. I'm just making steel and glass and everything I need, and I'm mostly letting the private sector handle things, since the capitalists will build more profitable stuff. In theory, I could expand my construction a lot more, but I need to keep my money ready for the 1,000 conscripts I'll be raising in this huge war to cut down Germany. Check out that standard living spike when I start conscripting, by the way. In this war, I'll be freeing Bavaria, Hanover, and Westphalia, getting war operations, and finally conquering Bohemia and Moravia to complete the states I need to form the Danubian State. Qing China joined the war on Germany's side, along with Spain, but the only opponent I was worried about was Germany. The battles are going smoothly, as I had turned on luxurious supplies and every extra mobilization option I could, and in Bohemia, I had a battle between 538 Romanian battalions and 246 German battalions. This is an immense battle, and these huge fights take forever to complete, so getting to Berlin will take a very long time. The war didn't end until 1921, at which point I made a save before forming the Danubian State, in case I really don't like the color. Romania's blue is beautiful, and I was a little scared to give it up. I formed the Danubian State with 250 million GDP and over 16 standard of living, but also a huge debt from the war. At this point I was looking to finish up the run, so I declared war on Britain with the intention to break them apart, but honestly, I don't think I have the debt cap for another all-out total war. I got to 300 million GDP in December of 1921, and I was having trouble landing in Britain because I don't have a big enough navy to ship over 300 battalions in a naval landing, and the British Navy was destroying my convoys, absolutely demolishing my supply network, which tanked my GDP. I lost 50 million GDP to the British convoy raids, and then I started defaulting. The Romanian army was just too expensive, and against Britain, there was no land war to leverage its immense size for victory, sadly. I gave up on continuing the war in 1922 because I was done playing by this point. The lag is immense, the war is stuck, I'm defaulting, and I'm ready to call it here. This was the Wallachia guide, in which I took the little Ottoman tributary and turned them into an immensely powerful Eastern European state united by atheism and the Danube River. My power block eventually controlled all of Italy, Syria, and Iraq alongside Japan, and I skipped back a save to 1921 to better show my stats for the run, since I only tanked my GDP to defaulting for the British War. I ended up at 275 million pounds of GDP, which could grow to 300 million before sinking back to 150 million after the British destroyed my convoys. I was at a healthy 16 standard of living, which isn't too bad considering I still have a considerable peasant population. In terms of demographics, we've got a very multicultural Danube state, with Romanians being dominant, but now that we have a ton more primary cultures, we won't be quite so Romanian dominated. Check out Bessarabia with over 300,000 Japanese pops, which when combined with the Koreans there add up to almost as much as the Romanians. The entire east coast of Romania has got tons of Koreans, which is super cool. In Bulgaria, the Romanians are close to overtaking the Bulgarians, but still a solid couple 100,000 off. Southern Serbia remains almost entirely Serbian, but northern Serbia has become a hub of cultures with yet more Koreans and Romanians. Check out Croatia here with all these Mashrikis, presumably from Iraq and Syria, who I got in my power block quite early on. Western Hungary is still firmly Hungarian, but with a significant Romanian and German minority, and the same goes for Eastern Hungary, albeit replace the Germans with Italians. To give you an idea of how much migration I'm getting, just glance at the population graph. I mean, my god, I don't think I've seen a population graph that vertical. I'm not even entirely sure why exactly I'm getting such an immense number of migrants, but somehow, it's just happening. I did take the freedom of movement mandate for my block, which is of course helping, but I can't imagine it's helping that much. In terms of the rest of the world, we don't see a ton of interesting cultural exchanges, but we do have the country of River Plate, which I guess is just English Argentina. Man, first Burgundy, now this? Weird. Regardless, this is the Romania guide. I hope it helps you to achieve the beautiful Romania you want in your game. Thank you for your time.